Is this some kind of joke? The question came out sharp and rude, cutting through the quiet buzz of the hangar's bright lights. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a man whose neat uniform and sure stance showed he knew all about computers and modern tech, held a tablet in one hand and waved the other hand like he was swatting a fly. We asked the depot for a top-level expert, not someone from ancient history. Walter Hayes, 83 years old, said nothing at all. He stood just inside the huge hangar, a small bent figure who looked tiny in the massive space. Behind him was the dark shape of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, sitting quiet and broken in the middle of the floor. He wore plain denim overalls over a checkered shirt. These were the clothes of a man who still worked with his hands. His hands were twisted with age and marked with brown spots. He held them loosely in front of him. His eyes, a light but surprisingly clear blue, weren't looking at the cocky young sergeant. They were staring at the plane. He took a slow step forward. The soft sound of his old work boots echoed a little on the shiny concrete floor. The airmen standing around the Warbird, a team of about 6 young technicians in their early 20s, looked at each other and smirked. Some rolled their eyes. Rodriguez let out a frustrated sigh. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stay by the entrance. This is an active work area for an important military aircraft." His tone was the kind you'd use on a kid who had wandered into the road, or what's left of one anyway. Walter's gaze moved along the lines of the A-10, from the flat nose that held the GAU-8 Avenger cannon to the twin tails pointing high in the air. He saw past the dull gray paint and the stenciled numbers. He saw the heart of the machine. "She's hurt!" He finally turned his eyes to Sergeant Rodriguez. "What's she telling you?" he asked, his voice a low, rough rumble. Rodriguez scoffed, tapping his tablet with an angry finger. "She's telling us a lot of things, old man. The ECU won't connect with the digital throttle system. The MIL STD-1553 data bus is showing a waterfall of error codes we can't figure out. We've replaced every important part from the DAS to the CICU. We've run computer tests for 72 hours straight. The bird is completely dead, and we're supposed to be on deployment in 5 days." He rattled off the technical terms like a priest saying prayers, a list of modern problems for a modern aircraft. Walter nodded slowly, taking in the information without looking at the glowing screen. He walked toward the aircraft, taking his time. Rodriguez stepped in his path, putting out a hand to physically stop him. "Whoa there, Grandpa. I need to see your paperwork. You can't just walk up and touch a $30 million piece of equipment." Walter stopped. He didn't seem upset. He just seemed patient. He reached into the back pocket of his overalls and pulled out a simple, cracked leather wallet. From it, he took out a faded plastic ID card. It was an old government work card. The photo showed a much younger man with the same clear eyes. Rodriguez grabbed it, his eyes scanning it with practiced doubt. "Walter Hayes, civilian consultant." He looked up from the card, his face showing total disbelief. "What are you going to do? Tell it a fairy tale from the old days?" A few of the younger airmen laughed quietly. Walter simply reached down and picked up a small canvas tool bag he had set by his feet. He began to unroll it on a nearby workbench. The tools inside were not the shining laser-cut instruments the other mechanics used. They were old, their metal darkened with age, their wooden and plastic handles worn smooth from many years of use. They looked like something you'd find in the bottom of a forgotten toolbox. "What in the world is that?" Rodriguez asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Are those handmade? What are you planning on doing? Hitting the engine with a hammer?" "Sir, this is a controlled space. We use measured, certified equipment, not old relics." He pointed a finger at a strange-looking wrench. Its head was bent at an odd angle. "I'm pretty sure that thing doesn't even exist in the standard tool set." The airmen moved closer, their interest mixing with their amusement. It felt like a break from the crazy frustration of the last 3 days. This old man and his ancient tools were a welcome, if strange, distraction. Walter picked up the odd wrench, his twisted fingers closing around it with familiar ease. The weight of it was something he knew well, a part of him. "Sometimes a standard tool set is the problem," Walter said, his voice quiet but carrying in the huge space. He looked at the access panel near the A-10's main landing gear leg. "Did you check the hydraulic pressure regulator's bypass valve by hand?" Rodriguez threw his hands up in the air. "By hand? The system diagnostics cleared the entire hydraulic system. The pressure is normal. It's an electronic problem, a software ghost in the machine. It's not something you can fix with a rusty piece of metal from the Stone Age. The diagnostics can lie, Walter said, his gaze steady. They only see what they're programmed to look for. He took a step toward the plane again, the strange wrench held loosely in his hand. Rodriguez's face got hard, his patience, already thin, snapped. That's it. You are not allowed to be here, and you definitely are not allowed to touch this aircraft. You are interfering with United States Air Force property. As Rodriguez's voice got louder, the hangar's echoes making his anger bigger, the scene around Walter began to blur. The sneering face of the young sergeant, the gleam of the bright lights off the warthog's body, the low hum of electricity. It all started to fade, replaced by a different sound, a different light. The roar of jet engines on a dusty, sun-baked airstrip, the frantic shouts of men under pressure. The air was thick with the smell of sand and burning fuel. A younger Walter, his face covered with dirt and sweat, was squeezed deep inside the broken engine housing of an F-4 Phantom. The same oddly shaped wrench was in his hand. Its strange angle was the only thing that let him reach a broken bolt deep inside the machinery. Outside, his crew chief was screaming, "We gotta go now, Walt! They're walking the mortars in!" The ground shook with a distant boom. He ignored it, his focus complete. With a final desperate turn, the bolt locked in place. He scrambled out of the engine bay, giving a thumbs up. "Fire it up!" The engine sputtered, coughed black smoke, and then caught with a deafening scream. The Phantom began to roll before he was even clear of the wing. He stood on the metal grating of the runway, his chest heaving, the wrench still gripped in his hand, feeling its familiar life-saving weight. The memory disappeared as quickly as it came. He was back in the clean, quiet hangar. Sergeant Rodriguez was still talking, his face now red with anger. "And I will have you escorted off this base by security police if you take one more step." From the edge of the group of watchers, a young woman, Airman Chen, watched the argument with a growing sense of unease. She was new to the unit, still learning the job, but she knew wrong when she saw it. She had seen the name on the work order, Walter Hayes, called in by General Patterson himself, and she saw the way her sergeant, a man she respected for his technical skill, was treating this quiet, dignified old man. It was wrong. It was deeply, completely wrong. Rodriguez's pride had now turned into outright bullying. He was puffed up with his own power, enjoying the audience of his workers. "We have rules for a reason, sir. To protect the equipment, to protect people like you from getting in over your head. This isn't a propeller plane from the 1940s. That was the last straw for Chen. While Rodriguez was busy trying to scare the unmovable old man, she slipped away from the group, her heart pounding. She found an unused maintenance corner hidden behind a stack of spare parts boxes. She pulled out her personal cell phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't have the general's number, but she had the next best thing. She called the direct line for the wing's command chief, Master Sergeant Brooks, a man she'd met once during her welcome briefing. A man known for his no-nonsense attitude and his fierce loyalty to his airmen, past and present. His assistant answered. "Command Chief's office." "This is Airman Chen from the 355th Maintenance Squadron," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need to speak with him. It's an emergency." There was a pause. "What kind of emergency, Airman?" "It's about Mr. Walter Hayes. Ma'am, he's down here in Hangar 4. General Patterson sent him." She paused. "And Sergeant Rodriguez is about to have him arrested." The line went silent. Not a disconnected silence, but a heavy, deep quiet that spoke volumes. Chen could hear the faint sound of a chair scraping back, of muffled but urgent words spoken away from the receiver. Help was on the way. The balance of power was about to shift, and Sergeant Rodriguez, happily unaware, was about to be buried under it. Inside the wing command building, the command chief, Master Sergeant Brooks, hung up the phone, his face pale. He didn't hesitate. He didn't bother with the intercom. He moved with a speed that didn't match his age and rank, walking fast down the carpeted hallway and bursting into the office of General Patterson without knocking. The general, a two-star with a chest full of ribbons and an air of constant impatience, looked up from a stack of briefing papers, his eyes flashing with annoyance at the breach of rules. "What is it, Chief?" General, we have a code red situation in Hangar 4. Patterson's posture stiffened. A fire? An active shooter? What? Worse, sir, the chief said, his voice grim. It's Walter Hayes. You sent for him to look at the grounded A-10? The general nodded. I did. The best man for the job. Did he figure it out? He hasn't had the chance, sir. The NCO in charge, a Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, is refusing him access to the aircraft. According to the airman who called me, he's been mocking him, insulting him, and is currently threatening to have him arrested by security police. The change in General Patterson was immediate and terrifying. The bureaucratic annoyance vanished, replaced by an icy fury that seemed to drop the temperature in the room. He stood up, his chair scraping back harshly. He grabbed his service cap from its stand, placing it perfectly on his head in one smooth, angry motion. Get my vehicle, he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Now. Get the wing commander on the radio and tell him to meet me at Hangar 4 in 5 minutes, and pull the service record and performance reviews for a Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. I want to see them on my tablet before we arrive. The chief was already out the door, his voice echoing down the hall as he barked orders into his radio. Back in Hangar 4, Sergeant Rodriguez had reached the peak of his self-importance. Walter Hayes had not moved, had not responded to his threats. He just stood there, his quiet dignity a silent criticism that made Rodriguez more angry than any argument could have. All right, that's it, old man, Rodriguez said, finally pulling his radio from his belt. You've had your little field trip. I'm calling security police. Maybe a nice chat with them in a holding cell will remind you what happens when unauthorized civilians wander onto a secure flight line. He held the radio to his mouth, his thumb hovering over the talk button. This is for your own good. We can't have you getting hurt or breaking something we can't fix. It was the ultimate act of arrogance, the final unforgivable insult. He was framing his own pride as a form of protection, casting Walter as a doddering old fool who needed to be saved from himself. The other airmen shifted uncomfortably. The joke wasn't funny anymore. Just as Rodriguez's thumb pressed the button, a sound from outside the hangar overrode the quiet hum within. It wasn't the distant drone of a jet. It was the high-pitched, insistent whine of sirens growing louder at an alarming rate. And it wasn't just one siren. It was a chorus of them coming together on their position. Every head in the hangar turned toward the massive corrugated steel doors. With a low groan, the doors began to slide open, flooding the dimly lit space with the brilliant, unforgiving light of the afternoon sun. Silhouetted against the glare was a black command vehicle flanked by 2 military police trucks, their lights flashing silently. They screeched to a halt just outside the hangar entrance. The driver's side door of the command car flew open and out stepped General Patterson, his expression a mask of controlled rage. He was followed a second later by the wing commander, a full bird colonel whose face was a mixture of confusion and dread. The airmen, who had been relaxing and smirking moments before, snapped to attention with a collective clatter of boots on concrete. Sergeant Rodriguez froze, the radio still in his hand, his mouth open. His entire world had just tilted on its axis. General Patterson strode into the hangar, his polished shoes clicking in angry rhythm on the floor. He didn't even glance at Rodriguez or the other stunned technicians. His eyes were locked on one person. He walked directly to Walter Hayes, stopped 2 feet in front of him, and executed the sharpest, most perfectly respectful salute Rodriguez had ever witnessed. It was a salute reserved for heroes, for presidents, for men of immense stature. Mr. Hayes, the general's voice boomed, sharp and clear. It is an honor, sir. I apologize deeply for the reception you have received on my base. Walter, who had remained unmoved by Rodriguez's tirades, seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of the formal respect. He gave a slow, tired nod of acknowledgement. The salute was returned with a simple gesture, not a military one, but one of mutual understanding. Then General Patterson turned, his body moving with the speed of a striking snake. His icy gaze swept over the ramrod straight airman and finally settled on Sergeant Rodriguez, pinning him in place. Do you have any idea who this is? The general's voice was deceptively calm, yet it carried an edge of tempered steel that made every person in the hangar flinch. Rodriguez could only shake his head, his face pale. This, the general announced, his voice rising to fill the huge space, is Chief Master Sergeant Walter Hayes. Retired. This man has more hours working on combat aircraft than every single one of you has been alive, combined. He took a step toward the silent A-10, running a hand along its wing as if it were a prized racehorse. When this aircraft was still on the drawing board, Walter Hayes was in a jungle keeping phantoms flying with nothing but scavenged parts and pure genius. When the GAU-8 Avenger's ammunition feed system kept jamming in high G turns, the engineers at Fairchild Republic couldn't solve it. They sent the blueprints to Chief Hayes, who was in the field, and he redesigned the feed chute mechanism on the back of a napkin, a design they still use to this day. He turned back to the crowd, his eyes blazing. He wrote the book, the actual classified technical manual on combat turnaround maintenance for this airframe. He did it by hand in a tent during Desert Storm while rockets were landing on his airfield. The schematics you're looking at on your $10,000 ruggedized tablets? He drew the originals with a pencil in a war zone. The general took a final menacing step toward Rodriguez. This aircraft isn't just a machine to him. It is his legacy. It is his child. And you, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout, have just insulted a living legend on his own child's sickbed. A deep, shameful silence descended upon the hangar. The smirks were long gone, replaced by expressions of disbelief, awe, and deep burning embarrassment. Airman Chen felt a tear of vindication trace a path down her cheek. The truth was out, and it was more glorious than she could have imagined. The wing commander stepped forward, his face grim. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you're with me." The words were a death sentence for Rodriguez's career, and he knew it. He followed the colonel out of the hangar like a man walking to his own execution. General Patterson's posture relaxed slightly as he turned back to Walter. "Walt, from the bottom of my heart, I am so sorry. There's no excuse for that kind of ignorance." Walter simply shook his head, a flicker of sadness in his clear blue eyes. He looked at the remaining young airmen, who were now staring at him as if he were a ghost from their history books. "They're good kids, General, just proud," Walter said, his rough voice filled with a surprising lack of hate. "They trust the machine more than the man. They've been taught to follow what the screen tells them." He looked at the silent warthog. "But the plane has a soul. It makes noises. It groans. It shakes. You can't find that on a screen. You have to listen to it. You have to feel it." He unrolled his canvas kit again, the greasy, familiar smell of old oil and steel filling the air. He picked up a different tool this time, a simple-looking screwdriver with a dark wooden handle worn smooth and dark with the sweat and oil of decades. He held it up for a moment, his thumb stroking the worn wood. The pristine hanger dissolved. He was 20 years old again, a young airman with slick-back hair, standing in a hangar much like this one, but filled with the thunderous radial engines of propeller planes. A grizzled, pot-bellied chief master sergeant, a man who had worked on B-17s in the skies over Europe, was pressing this very screwdriver into his hand. "This was my father," the old chief had said, his voice thick with emotion. "He used it to build furniture. I used it to fix fortresses. Now it's yours. Remember, son, it's not about the tool. It's about the hands that hold it and the knowledge passed down with it. Don't ever forget that." The memory faded, leaving the old screwdriver feeling warm in his hand. He walked to the A-10, the crowd of awestruck airmen parting before him like the Red Sea. He didn't plug in a diagnostic computer or check a tablet. He simply knelt by the main landing gear, placing his free hand flat against the cold metal of the fuselage. He closed his eyes for a moment, just feeling. Then he used the wooden handle of the screwdriver to tap gently on a small, unassuming access panel. His head tilted, listening carefully to the sound of each tap. After a few moments, he stopped. A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. "It's a harmonic vibration," he announced to no one in particular. "There's a tiny crack in the mounting bracket for the hydraulic accumulator. Every time the APU spools up, it throws the pressure sensors off by a fraction of a percent. Too small for the diagnostics to flag as an error, but enough to make the flight control computer refuse to start the engines." He looked up at the young airman Chen. "Hand me a torque wrench, please. A half-inch drive." She practically ran to get it. He took the wrench, attached a socket, and reached deep inside the landing gear well. There was a single soft click as he made a tiny adjustment, no more than an eighth of a turn. He pulled the wrench out, wiped his hands on an old rag from his pocket, and stood up, his knees cracking softly. "Try her now," he said quietly. All eyes turned to Airman Chen, who, with a nod from the general, climbed the ladder into the cockpit. She strapped herself in, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the engine start sequence switches. She looked down at Walter, who gave her a reassuring nod. She took a deep breath and flipped the first switch. For a second, there was only the familiar whine of the auxiliary power unit. Then a low rumble started deep within the aircraft, a sound they hadn't heard in days. The rumble grew into a deep guttural roar as the A-10's twin General Electric engines spooled to life, their iconic sound filling the hangar with a thunderous, beautiful noise. The Warthog was alive. The airmen erupted in a spontaneous cheer, a wave of pure relief and joy. In the weeks that followed, a memo from General Patterson's office required a new monthly training program for the entire maintenance wing. It was called Lessons from the Legends, a program where retired veterans were brought in to share their hands-on, hard-won knowledge with the new generation of technicians. The first lecture, of course, was delivered by Chief Master Sergeant Walter Hayes, who stood not at a podium, but beside an open-engine cowling, his old canvas tool roll spread out before him. Several months later, in a quiet diner on the edge of town, Walter Hayes sat alone at the counter, stirring a cup of black coffee. The bell over the door chimed and a young man in civilian clothes walked in. He was no longer a sergeant. His uniform now bore the stripes of a corporal. It was Rodriguez. He saw Walter, hesitated for a long moment, then walked over. He didn't offer a grand dramatic apology. He simply slid onto the stool next to the old man. "Sir," he began, his voice quiet and humbled, "I was wondering if you had a minute. Could you tell me what it was like working on the F-4 Phantoms?" Walter stopped stirring his coffee. He turned and looked at the young man, a genuine warm smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, his eyes twinkling with memory, "it all started on a hot, dusty airstrip in a place called Da Nang. The greatest tools in any hangar are not found in a toolbox. They are experience, humility, and respect." If you were inspired by the story of Walter Hayes, please hit the like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of unassuming heroes.